Chapter 7. Egan had told us to take the next week off. We all just assumed that was because he had things to do, but I think now it was just more of the cat and mouse game he played. Push, back off, push again. Nathan used the time to work on his songs, harder than ever. I found lyric sheets everywhere, notebook paper covered with his usual enigmatic verses. He never explained them, and I never asked, but he sang them and played them for me over and over, so I'd know them when we went back into the studio at River House. The actual composing of them was something he did in private, down by the river or in the attic, the way I'd found him the first night. I would wake up, check the clock to find it was the wee hours, and then see Nathan's bed empty, the extension cord trailing out of the room. He and I never saw the spade again while we cleaned the church. Sometimes I wondered if I could look in the closet where I'd thrown it that night and still find it, but I never tried. Although I hadn't taken the spade seriously when Nathan saw it, my own encounter with it in Egan's kitchen had scared the hell out of me. Because if I didn't believe the spade was a coincidence, then I had to believe the riverman was what? A demon? A devil? A warlock? Or maybe he was only a sick person playing a scary game and had planted the spade in the church somehow. But why? Well, he'd known how Nate would interpret it, as the devil trying to scare him away from working with Egan. Nathan's natural godly reaction would then be to work harder than ever, which was exactly what Egan wanted. But why had Egan shown the spade to me? I think now it was because he was such an arrogant spirit. He thought if he showed me who he really was, I would be frightened enough to stay out of his way or go back where I came from. Several times that week I almost told Nathan I'd seen the spade too, but self-interest stopped me. I cared about my own musical future enough to rationalize that if Egan was no more than your average asshole, we might get something out of him. I didn't want Nate getting upset and calling it all off because of a little garden spade. Friday of that week was the 4th of July and Artis's birthday. When I woke up, Nathan was still asleep, one long arm trailing down to the floor. He'd been up late. I'd awakened about 3 o'clock and heard him in the attic. I'd gone out to sit at the top of the stairs for a while, staring at the dull shine of Artis's turquoise door and listening to Nate play the same lick over and over, hearing the soft drone of his voice as he tried to work out the lyrics. Finally, comforted to hear him so serenely working, I was able to go back to sleep. When I got down to the kitchen, I told Artis, "Happy birthday, firecracker," and kissed her cheek. She blushed. She was stemming strawberries, and Mrs. Whitley was frosting a cake in white icing. "One layer's pink and one's blue," Artis told me, "so it's like red, white, and blue. Then we put sparklers on it instead of candles." "Cool. Can I do anything to help?" I was getting my usual cup of coffee, doctoring it with milk and sugar. "Not a thing," Mrs. Whitley said. "Nathan's still asleep?" "Afraid so. He was up half the night, as usual." "Writing songs," Mrs. Whitley said resignedly. "That's right." I didn't like just saying yeah to Nate's parents, but I couldn't muster the yes ma'am Nathan and Artis used. I'd had to come up with a lot of in-between polite responses. "I never hear him," Artis said. "I sleep like a rock." "Ah, youth," I said. "So you're what, 17 today?" "Yep. You buy me a present?" "Artis," her mother said. "I sure did, but you don't get it until the party." I drank the last of my coffee, which I'd cooled off with a lot of milk so I could slam it down. "I need to finish up some things over at the church. Nate says there's a special 4th of July service tonight." "At 7, so it'll be over in time for fireworks at the park." "Well, you ought to wake up that Nathan and make him go over there with you and help you," Mrs. Whitley said fondly. "Ah, let him sleep. I can handle it. It's just vacuuming." I reached for the church keys on their nail, but Artis said, "It's unlocked. Dad's over there finishing up his sermon for tonight." So I stopped in his study to say good morning to him. The church's atmosphere, smell, feel, sound of my footsteps in the hall, closed pleasantly around me, and Brother Whitley greeted me cheerfully. "Happy 4th," he said. "That son of mine still asleep?" There it was again, that eager concern about Nathan, as if he were just a bit different. He was working most of the night. I figured I could finish up over here and let him sleep. Brother Whitley shook his head and smiled a little. "You're a loyal friend, Tim," he said. "A loyal friend." "Well, I try," I said, and went on down the hall to get the vacuum cleaner out of the closet. In the sanctuary, I started at the back, out in the foyer, or what Nathan told me was called the narthex, to work up to the altar and vacuum my way out one of the side doors without leaving any footprints. I went over the plush maroon carpet carefully, making the vacuum cleaner tracks even. I got all the way down the center aisle, working backwards, and then turned around to vacuum the area between the front pews and the communion rail. For a second, I couldn't believe what I saw. Then I believed it and couldn't move. An enormous rattlesnake had wound itself around the communion rail, its head raised, giving that heart-stopping rattle I'd heard enough as a kid in California to learn to hate and fear all snakes. And I was 2 feet away. I dropped the vacuum cleaner handle, and the snake reared back to strike, and I couldn't move. Then 2 hands grabbed my arm so hard it hurt, the pain jolting me, and yanked me aside just as the snake struck. It landed on the carpet instead and disappeared underneath the pews. Stiff with shock, I kept trying to back farther and farther away from where it had gone, and Nathan's hands stayed on my shoulders, steadying me. "We need to get Dad," he kept saying, walking me to the side door. "We need to get Dad and find it and get it out of here. Come on." By the time we got to the hall, I was shaking so hard my thighs wouldn't hold me up. It was a good thing that coffee hadn't filtered all the way through me yet, or I'm sure I'd have wet my pants. Nathan sat me down in a chair in the hallway. "Dad!" he yelled, and at the tone in his voice, Brother Whitley came hurrying out. "There's a rattlesnake in the sanctuary," Nathan told him. "It went back up under the pews." Without hesitating, Brother Whitley ran into the sanctuary through the side door. "Come on, we have to find it," Nathan urged me. I can't. See, I hate snakes. I really hate them." Okay, he said, and went after his dad. I sat trembling for a while, after a few convulsive jerks to make sure no snakes were under my chair, on the wall behind my back, dangling over my head. Finally, I calmed down enough to start feeling like a wuss. When I ventured back into the sanctuary, Nathan and his dad were scouting the side aisles, looking under each pew. Nathan saw me come in and shook his head at me. "No sign of it," he called. "I bet it went straight out the front doors right there at the bottom where they don't quite meet," Brother Whitley said decisively. "If there was a snake in this sanctuary, we'd have heard it rattle by now." "Sorry I wasn't much help," I said, coming gingerly down the center aisle. I hate snakes. Always been afraid of them." "Hey," Brother Whitley assured me, "a snake phobia is no laughing matter. Lots of folks are deathly afraid of them, and of spiders, too." He stood with his hands on his hips and looked around and sighed. "Well, if some old lady gets bit by a rattler at the service tonight, y'all come visit me in jail, okay?" Nathan shot me a funny look. "I don't think we'll see it again." "Hope not." Brother Whitley went back to his study. Nathan finished vacuuming while I looked under the pews to make sure there was nothing a snake could crawl up on and cling to. I even checked the choir loft. "You're not going to find it up there either," Nathan said, giving me another look. I finally got it. "You think it was another scare tactic from our own personal devil?" "Tim," Nathan wound the cord around the vacuum cleaner. "No way is a rattlesnake going to come all the way into the church and wrap itself around the communion rail. You know how shy they are." "They weren't shy out at that old lady's house when there were about 1,000,000 of them on her porch." "So you think this snake's just left over from that?" "Well, according to your dad, they probably spread out all over the county. Do you think that was the devil?" Nathan shook his head. "That was just some natural infestation of 'em, a big nest of 'em coming out of the woods or something. But this one was put here. Trust me, it was another warning." I followed him as he wheeled the vacuum cleaner out the side door and down the hall. "Nathan, man, I gotta tell you something." Nathan pushed the vacuum into the closet. "Go ahead." I shook my head, starting to feel ridiculous. "I don't know what to make of this, but you remember the spade we saw upstairs? He nodded, his face tightening. I saw it at Egan's the other day, or at least one like it, in the corner of his kitchen behind the door. Nathan stared at me. Are you kidding? And then when I looked around, Egan was leaning in the doorway looking at me and sort of smiling, like he knew I was afraid of it, like he wanted me to be afraid of it. What'd you do? I got out of there, I admitted. Oh, that was when you came out and said, let's go. Right. Whew, Nathan said and shook his head. It's coming after you too, isn't it? I started to realize he was missing the point. Nate, don't you get it? It's Egan. Egan's doing it. But he kept shaking his head. No, it's not. It's not Egan. Whatever it is just wants you to think it's Egan, just to fake us off so we'll stop working with him. What? This had to be the craziest conversation I'd ever had. But I couldn't deny that what he said made sense. If we severed our relationship with Egan out of fear, that might be the trap after all, and we'd have walked right into it. But the way he was looking at me, I said lamely, and stopped. All Egan had done was to stand and smile at me, after all. Maybe, in my fright, I had just imagined a sinister overlay to his face. I know you don't like him, Nathan said calmly. You've both got real strong personalities, and every once in a while they clash. Well, thank you, Professor Whitley. But he's not a bad guy, Tim. He's doing a lot of good stuff for us, you know. The important thing is we don't stop. Nathan's face looked pale and grim. We just have to be on guard against it. Armed, I remembered him saying the night he'd seen the spade. Armed by praying, and yet he didn't think anybody heard him. Well, say your prayers then, buddy, I snapped, whether you think God hears you or not. I felt a hard satisfaction at seeing him flinch. But he didn't say anything else, and we didn't talk about it anymore because there was nothing else to say and nothing either one of us could do. What Nathan believed, that it was Satan himself trying to stop him from doing what his stern God required of him, was to me pretty much like being caught between a rock and a hard spot. But to consider my own opinions or fears or whatever they were, that was even weirder. If it was Egan doing it, then was he the devil? And had he sent the snake to warn me off again? Or to try and kill me this time? Ready to party? Nate asked me with delicate irony as we crossed the backyard. Boy, am I ever. I really was, even if it was just a family picnic. Right now, I felt desperate for normal things like lots of food and Paige coming later. Aren't you? He sighed and stopped at the foot of the back steps. I had already noticed how often we ended up talking about important stuff just before we went into the house. It was as if Nathan felt it was his last chance, before he had to go back into the parsonage and be the nice preacher's boy again, to talk about what was on his mind. Not really, he said. It'll be hot, and my dad talking so loud, and my mother fussing around. And then Paige, and I feel like I have to keep giving to her and that I never can give enough. He ran his hand back through his hair in his usual gesture of helplessness. You're the only one not making demands on me. You saved my life back there, I told him. Not much more I can demand. Oh, it wouldn't have killed you. A snake that big? Are you kidding? He just rolled his eyes. Anyway, now we have to go in and talk about it and listen to Mom and Artis ooh and ah, and then Dad'll tell every single person who comes over here today, and we'll have to explain it all to Paige. His weary sing-song stopped, and he sighed. One more thing to sit around and talk about. My mind, of course, was harking back to what he'd said about giving to Paige. Are you getting tired of Paige or something? He looked at me in honest surprise. No, of course I'm not. Are you in love with her? He hesitated. I don't know. If you were, you'd know, I said, out of my infinite wisdom, and you wouldn't talk about how hard it is to keep giving to her. I know. Nathan shut his eyes as remorse hit him. I'm just selfish, I guess, too wrapped up in myself to have a girl like her. No, you're not selfish. I didn't mean that. It's just, Nate, you don't seem to enjoy her like, I almost said like I would, but changed it, like most guys would. I mean, I just think she ought to at least be as important to you as your music, and I don't think she is. He looked at me as if I'd suddenly turned into somebody else. "Nothing is," he said shortly, and went up the steps into the house. Well, that settled that. I went in too, and when I heard him going up the stairs, I detoured into the kitchen where Artis and Mrs. Whitley were making sandwiches. For a while I kidded around with them and ate scraps and just generally enjoyed being with folks. I didn't mention the rattlesnake, but Brother Whitley came home for lunch and told about it, so I gave my first-hand account. And that was when I realized Nathan hadn't told his dad about pulling me out of the snake's way just in time. This was news to Brother Whitley. "Nathan got there just in time, did he?" he kept saying. "I told you I was scared stiff. I couldn't move." "Good old Nate," Brother Whitley said, shaking his head. Mrs. Whitley was held in rapt attention at the idea, clasping a spatula to her chest. Even Artis was wide-eyed. For my part, I still didn't want to think about what would have happened if Nathan hadn't showed up. "Where is he, anyway?" Brother Whitley asked. "Here I am," Nathan said, coming around the kitchen doorway from the hall. "Any lunch?" He stayed his usual affable self, even when his family fussed over him, munching a sandwich and downplaying the whole thing, or at least his part in it, as much as possible. I had the feeling that he was, well, not exactly having to make an effort, but really determined to be nice and fit in, be part of the family. For me, who had always craved that sort of thing, it was as easy as breathing. For Nathan, I'd started to realize, it was more like having to swim.